Snow pounded against the abandoned hunting cabin's rotting roof like an endless barrage of icy bullets, each flake another second ticking away on Emily Parker's life. Lightning split the South Dakota sky, illuminating for just a heartbeat the crumpled figure huddled in the corner of the dilapidated structure. 12 hours ago, she had been the reluctant wife of the most feared man in Whitetail County. Now, she was nothing more than a loose end to be cut. Her swollen belly the only witness to her desperate fight for 2 lives instead of 1. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rusty lock rattled against the cabin door as another brutal gust of wind threatened to tear the entire structure from its foundation. Emily's trembling fingers pressed against her side, where Jack's brother Caleb had struck her with the handle of his hunting knife. Her ribs screamed with each shallow breath. Blood and melting snow mingled on the dirt floor beneath her, forming tiny crimson rivers through cracks in the ancient wooden planks. "Please," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her. The vast wilderness surrounding the abandoned Mitchell property swallowed her voice, just as it had swallowed the gunshots that had ended Old Man Mitchell's life 2 winters ago. The Parkers had claimed this land after that. Jack and his gang of thieves masquerading as legitimate ranchers, and Emily, she had been paying for a debt, married off to Jack by her gambling stepfather, who'd lost everything but his stepdaughter at a poker table in Silver Creek. Another contraction seized her, coming earlier than the last. The baby wasn't due for another month, but the beating had changed that. Jack had discovered the bus tickets she'd hidden inside her grandmother's old Bible. Her desperate plan to escape before winter made the mountain roads impassable. "Ungrateful bitch," he'd snarled, whiskey heavy on his breath. "After everything I've given you." What he'd given her were bruises, hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves, isolation from anyone who might help her, and the constant threat that hung over her like a shadow. "You try to leave, I'll hunt you down and put you in the ground." Emily dragged herself toward a pile of musty burlap sacks in the corner, each movement a battle against pain and the growing pool of water beneath her. The blizzard had found every hole in the decaying roof, turning the cabin floor into a freezing lake. If the bleeding didn't kill her, hypothermia would. Jack and his men had brought her here after the beating, 8 miles from their ranch house, to this abandoned hunting cabin where no one would hear her scream. They'd taken her wedding ring, her boots, the small pocket knife she kept in her coat. They'd even taken the silver locket containing a photograph of her real father, the only possession she had left of the man who died in Afghanistan when she was just 7 years old. "We'll come back in a few days," Caleb had sneered, securing the heavy padlock. "If you're still breathing, maybe Jack will forgive you." But Emily knew better. The look in Jack's eyes had been final. She had become a problem, and Jack Parker eliminated problems permanently. Another flash of lightning revealed the cabin's interior. Rotting beams, rusted hunting traps, and something Emily hadn't noticed before. A small opening where the back wall had partially collapsed. Freedom lay just beyond, but her body refused to cooperate. The last beating had been methodical, designed to incapacitate without killing her immediately. Jack preferred slow deaths for those who betrayed him. The baby kicked, a surprisingly strong movement that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "Hold on," she whispered, pressing her palm against the curve of her belly. "Just hold on." Through the gaps in the wooden walls, the blizzard raged with increasing fury. Wind howled like hungry wolves, and the temperature dropped with each passing hour. Emily's thin cotton dress provided little protection against the brutal Dakota winter. She thought of her stepfather, now 3 months in his grave, killed in a bar fight before he could see what his gambling had done to his only stepdaughter. She thought of her husband, who had seemed so charming that first night, offering to clear her stepfather's debts in exchange for her hand, How quickly the charm had faded once the judge had spoken the words, binding them together. Never again, she promised herself, teeth chattering as she pulled her knees closer to her chest. No man will ever own me again. The contraction that followed nearly tore a scream from her throat. She bit down on her knuckles until she tasted blood, refusing to give voice to her agony. Even here, miles from the Parker Ranch, she had learned to suffer in silence. The hours bled together, marked only by the steady rhythm of pain and the gradual lessening of the storm. By midnight, the snow had softened to a gentle patter, and the wind had died to occasional whispers through the rafters. In the newfound quiet, Emily heard something that sent ice through her veins. Footsteps, crunching through the fresh snow. They couldn't have returned so soon. Jack had said days, not hours, unless he'd decided to end things more quickly. Emily dragged herself toward the small gap in the cabin's rear wall, ignoring the fire in her ribs and the wetness between her legs. The opening was smaller than she'd initially thought, large enough for her head and shoulders, but her swollen belly made complete escape impossible. Still, she pressed her face to the gap, drawing in the clean, snow-washed air, searching the darkness for the source of the footsteps. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees, too fluid for Jack or his men, who always moved with the heavy-footed arrogance of those who feared nothing in their domain. Emily squinted, her vision blurring. From exhaustion and fear, the shadow materialized into a tall figure, moving with the patient confidence of someone at home in the wilderness. The stranger wore a thick coat that flapped gently in the night breeze and what looked like a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Something, long and slender, was slung across his back, a rifle, she thought. Emily held her breath as he approached the cabin, his footsteps nearly silent on the fresh snow. The stranger paused at the front of the cabin, and Emily heard the rattle of the padlock as he inspected it. There was a moment of silence, followed by 3 sharp blows that echoed through the night. The lock fell away, and the cabin door creaked open. Emily pressed herself back against the wall, seeking shadows. She had learned that strange men were rarely saviors, just a different kind of danger. A beam of light cut through the darkness. A small LED flashlight. The stranger lifted it high, casting its glow across the cabin's interior. He took 2 steps inside, then stopped. Even in the dim light, Emily could see that he wasn't white. His skin was the rich bronze of the Lakota people who still lived. On the reservation 60 miles west of Whitetail County. "I know you're here," he said, his voice deep but quiet. "I heard crying." Emily remained silent, weighing her options. She was trapped, weakened by pain and blood loss. If he meant her harm, there was little she could do to stop him. The stranger moved the light in a slow arc, finally illuminating the corner where Emily huddled. Their eyes met across the expanse of the cabin, his dark and steady, hers wide with fear and defiance. "You're hurt," he observed, taking another step. Forward. Emily pressed herself harder against the wall. "Stay back!" He stopped, respecting her command, and lowered the flashlight slightly. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Daniel Blackhawk. I was tracking a wounded elk when I heard sounds from this cabin." The pain returned then, a wave so intense that Emily couldn't maintain her defensive posture. She doubled over, a strangled gasp escaping before she could stop it. Daniel moved quickly, crossing the space between them and kneeling at a respectful distance. In the flashlight's glow, Emily could see his face clearly. Strong features, a small scar near his right temple, and eyes that held neither pity nor a threat, only calm assessment. "The baby comes," he said, glancing at the blood-soaked burlap beneath her. Emily nodded, unable to speak through the contraction. "Who did this to you?" Daniel asked when the pain had subsided enough for her to breathe. "Again, my husband," Emily managed, the words bitter on her tongue, "and his brother." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. They left you here to die. It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway. Yes. He set the flashlight on the ground and shrugged off his coat. It was made of modern weatherproof material lined with sheepskin. Without asking permission, he draped it over her shoulders. The unexpected kindness nearly broke her composure. "Can you walk?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "I tried. My leg." She gestured to her right leg, where Caleb's boot had left a deep, purple bruise that spread from knee to ankle. Daniel nodded once, as if he'd already anticipated her answer. "I have a truck about a mile back where the road ends. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry. The baby won't wait for daylight." "Why help me?" Emily asked, suspicion warring with desperation. "You don't know me." Daniel began to gather the dry burlap sacks, placing them beneath her to lift her from the wet floor. His movements were efficient, his touch clinical rather than familiar. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know what it looks like when someone has been left to die, and I know what it means to survive when others have decided you shouldn't." Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. When it passed, Emily found herself gripping Daniel's forearm, her fingernails leaving half-moon impressions in his skin. He hadn't pulled away. "I can't go back to town," she gasped. "He'll find me?" "Not where I'm taking you," Daniel replied, and for the first time a hint of something like reassurance entered his voice. "My cabin is 15 miles north, hidden in a valley that even the locals don't know exists. You'll be safe there, until you're strong enough to decide what comes next." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Another contraction gripped Emily as Daniel carefully lifted her from the cabin floor. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. He adjusted his grip, cradling her with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. "I need to get you to the truck quickly," he said, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The temperatures dropping again. As he carried her through the doorway into the night, Emily caught her first glimpse of the sky since her imprisonment. The storm had cleared, revealing a canvas of stars scattered across the vast Dakota darkness. The moon hung low and full, casting enough silvery light to illuminate their path through the snow. "My name is Emily," she whispered, feeling she owed him that much. "Emily Parker." Daniel nodded once but said nothing as he began to navigate through the deep snow. Each step was deliberate, his movement steady despite his burden. The cold air burned Emily's lungs, but it felt cleansing after the musty staleness of the cabin. "How did you find me?" she asked, trying to focus on anything but the increasing frequency of her contractions. "I was tracking an elk I wounded yesterday," Daniel replied, his eyes continuously scanning their surroundings. "Lost the trail when the storm hit hard. Was heading back when I heard sounds from the cabin. Thought maybe someone else got caught in the blizzard." He paused, adjusting his grip again. "Didn't expect to find a woman in labor." Emily shivered despite the warmth of his coat. "Jack, my husband, he owns half the county. When he finds out I'm gone, the snow will cover our tracks," Daniel said with quiet confidence. "And where we're going, Parker and his men won't follow. Not many outsiders know the back routes through the reservation land." They continued in silence for several minutes, Emily fighting waves of pain, while Daniel focused on maintaining their pace through the difficult terrain. The forest grew denser, the trees providing some shelter from the biting wind. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a small clearing where an old but well-maintained Ford pickup truck waited, partially sheltered beneath overhanging pines. Daniel set Emily down carefully, propping her against the passenger door while he cleared snow from the windows and started the engine. The truck roared to life, warm air soon flooding from the heater vents. Daniel helped Emily inside, arranging his coat and an emergency blanket from behind the seat to make her as comfortable as possible. "The road's rough," he warned, putting the truck in gear. "But I know every pothole." As they began to move through the forest on what appeared to be little more than a game trail, Emily studied her rescuer in the dim dashboard light. Daniel Blackhawk was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s. His features were sharp, all angles and planes, with dark eyes that missed nothing. A traditional Lakota tattoo wrapped around his right wrist, disappearing beneath his flannel sleeve. "You're not just a hunter," she observed, gripping the door handle as the truck bounced over a fallen log. Daniel's eyes remained on the barely visible trail. "I'm the wildlife conservation officer for the reservation. I monitor elk migration patterns, track predator movements, keep an eye on poachers, and rescue dying women from abandoned cabins," Emily added, trying to smile through another contraction. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "First time for everything." They drove in silence for a while, the truck climbing steadily into higher elevations. The trees thinned as they crested a ridge, revealing a panoramic view of moonlit valleys and snow-covered peaks stretching toward the horizon. "Beautiful," Emily murmured, momentarily distracted from her pain. "This land has been Lakota territory for centuries," Daniel said, his voice taking on a different quality. "My great-grandfather walked these ridges. My grandmother knows every plant that grows here, every spring, every cave." "Your grandmother?" Emily asked. Daniel nodded. "She lives with me, Margaret Blackhawk. She was a nurse at the reservation clinic for 40 years before retiring. She'll help with the birth." The revelation that they were heading to a place where another woman would be present brought unexpected relief. Emily had been preparing herself to deliver her baby alone in that abandoned cabin, with no medical help or support. "Is she far?" Emily asked, unable to keep the urgency from her voice as another contraction hit, stronger than the last. 20 minutes, Daniel replied, pressing the accelerator slightly harder. "Maybe 15 if the North Trail is clear." He glanced at her with professional assessment. "How far apart are the contractions?" "Getting closer," Emily managed when the pain subsided. 5 minutes, maybe less." Daniel pressed his lips together. "First baby?" Emily nodded. "We'll make it," he said with calm assurance. "My grandmother has delivered hundreds of babies, some in conditions worse than this." As they continued through the wilderness, following trails invisible to Emily's untrained eye, she found herself studying the man beside her. Everything about Daniel Blackhawk contradicted what Jack had told her. About the Lakota people, where Jack spoke of laziness and dependency, she saw self-sufficiency and skill. Where he claimed ignorance, she recognized education and knowledge. "You went to college," she said suddenly, the realization clicking into place. His vocabulary, the way he carried himself. This wasn't just a hunter raised in isolation. Daniel gave her a quick, appraising glance. Wildlife biology at South Dakota State, masters in environmental science from Montana, came back to the reservation 8 years ago. "Why come back?" Emily asked, genuinely curious. Jack always said the smart Indians never returned once they got out. Daniel was quiet for so long that Emily thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held a depth of feeling that hadn't been there before. "This land needs protectors who understand both worlds," he said finally. "Who can speak the language of government agencies and remember the wisdom of our elders." He navigated the truck around a sharp bend, headlights illuminating a narrow passage between towering rock formations. "And some debts can only be repaid by returning." The cryptic statement hung in the air between them, but before Emily could ask for clarification, the truck emerged into a hidden valley, completely invisible from the ridge they'd traversed earlier. Nestled against the far slope, protected by towering pines and natural rock formations, stood a cabin. Light glowed from its windows, warm and inviting against the winter night. "Home," Daniel said simply. As they approached, the cabin's door opened. A small figure wrapped in a colorful blanket stepped onto the porch, the light behind her silhouetting her slight frame. Her long white hair was braided into a single plait that hung over one shoulder. "My grandmother," Daniel explained, parking the truck as close to the porch as possible. "She heard us coming." Margaret Blackhawk watched their approach without surprise, as if winter midnight rescues were commonplace. As Daniel carried Emily from the truck, the older woman stepped back into the cabin without a word. "She's preparing," Daniel explained, climbing the porch steps carefully with Emily in his arms. "Don't mind her silence. She speaks when necessary, not before." The cabin's interior was warm and unexpectedly spacious. A large wood stove dominated one wall, filling the room with heat, and the pleasant scent of pine. Modern furnishings mixed with traditional Lakota items, a star quilt draped over a comfortable-looking couch, handcrafted pottery on wooden shelves, and framed photographs alongside dream catchers and medicine wheels. Margaret had already transformed a portion of the main room, laying clean sheets over what appeared to be a daybed. Various supplies were arranged neatly on a small table nearby. Clean towels, basins, and what Emily recognized as medical equipment. "Put her here," Margaret directed, her voice soft but authoritative. She studied Emily with keen, dark eyes that missed nothing. "When did the contractions start?" "After they beat me," Emily answered honestly. "Maybe 12 hours ago." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her gaze. "And the waters?" "Broke about 4 hours ago," Emily replied, gasping as another contraction seized her. Margaret nodded once, then turned to her grandson. "Daniel, hot water, the red tea in the blue jar, and give us privacy." Daniel complied without question, moving to the kitchen area while Margaret helped Emily onto the prepared bed. The older woman's hands were cool and steady as she checked. Emily's pulse and forehead, fever beginning, she noted, her accent subtle but distinct. "The baby comes too soon. What is your name, daughter?" "Emily Parker," she replied, then corrected herself. "No, Emily Winters. That was my name before him." Margaret nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Names have power. They can trap or free us." She gently removed Daniel's coat from Emily's shoulders, her expression darkening as she took in the bruises visible beneath the torn dress. "Men who do this are hollow inside," she said quietly. "Empty men trying to fill themselves with power over others." She turned toward Daniel and spoke rapidly in Lakota. He responded in kind, his voice tight with what might have been anger. Margaret shook her head, then returned her attention to Emily. "We must clean you first," she said, her tone softening. "The child cannot come into the world through blood and pain alone. There must be cleansing." What followed was both humiliating and strangely comforting. Margaret helped Emily remove the filthy dress, bathing her with warm water infused with herbs that smelled of sage and sweetgrass. She wrapped Emily's ribs with strips of soft cloth, murmuring what sounded like prayers or perhaps medicine songs. Throughout it all, Daniel kept his back turned, focusing on whatever task his grandmother had assigned him. Clean and dressed in, one of Daniel's flannel shirts, which hung past her knees, Emily felt almost human again, but the contractions were intensifying, leaving little time between waves of pain to catch her breath. "The child is eager," Margaret observed, examining Emily with experienced hands. "But something is not right. The waters broke too early and there is too much blood." Fear, familiar and bitter, flooded back. "Will the baby die?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. Margaret's expression remained calm. "Not if I can help it, and not if you are as strong as I think you are." Margaret turned to Daniel. "Bring me the green pouch from the eastern shelf and the obsidian knife." Daniel retrieved the items without question, then hesitated by the bedside. "Should I go?" he asked, looking not at his grandmother, but at Emily. For reasons she couldn't articulate, Emily shook her head. "Stay," she said. Then, because she felt she owed him an explanation, "I don't want to be alone if things go badly." Margaret measured dried herbs from the pouch into a ceramic cup of steaming water. "Things will not go badly," she declared, with the confidence of someone who had seen too much death to be intimidated by its threat. "But he can stay if you wish. Daniel has steady hands." As the night deepened, the cabin became a world unto itself, isolated from everything beyond its walls. Margaret worked with quiet efficiency, administering herbal teas that eased some of Emily's pain and kept her strength from failing completely. Daniel sat nearby, following his grandmother's instructions without hesitation or embarrassment. Occasionally, his eyes met Emily's, and in them she saw not pity but something rarer, respect. Between contractions, when she could speak, Emily asked questions about the cabin, about the photographs on the walls, about anything that could distract her from what was happening to her body. "Daniel built this cabin himself," Margaret revealed, as she checked Emily's progress. "After he returned from university, the old family cabin had collapsed. He said if he was to be the bridge between worlds, he needed a home that honored both." "Grandmother," Daniel said softly, but there was no real annoyance in his voice. "She should know who helps her," Margaret insisted. "Knowledge builds trust, and she needs to trust us now." Another contraction seized Emily, more powerful than any before. Margaret nodded, suddenly businesslike. "It begins in earnest now. Daniel behind her, support her back." Daniel moved to sit behind Emily, allowing her to lean against his chest. The position should have frightened her, so vulnerable, so close to a man she barely knew. But instead, it felt strangely right, as if some part of her recognized safety, when all her experiences told her no such thing existed. "When the pain comes, push," Margaret instructed. "When it fades, breathe. Do not waste energy on screaming. The child cannot hear you, and the spirits already know your pain." What followed was a battle unlike any Emily had fought before. Her body became both battlefield and weapon, pain her enemy, and the child within her both the prize and her ally. Daniel remained solid behind her, his hands strong on her shoulders, his voice a low murmur of encouragement. Margaret commanded. The front lines, her ancient hands guiding the new life toward the light. "I can't," Emily gasped after what seemed like hours of pushing. "I can't do this." "You are already doing it," Margaret countered. "The head comes. One more push." Daniel leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You've survived this far," he said quietly. "You can survive this too." Something in his words, not empty reassurance, but simple truth, gave her the strength for one more push. Pain tore through her, blindingly intense, and then released in a rush. A tiny cry filled the cabin, high and indignant. "A boy," Margaret announced, her voice softening with something like wonder. "Strong lungs, good color." She wrapped the infant in a soft cloth and placed him on Emily's chest. "He has his mother's spirit in him." The baby was impossibly small, his face red and scrunched in protest at his abrupt entry into the cold world. But his eyes, when they fluttered open for just a moment, were clear and alert. 10 perfect fingers curled into fists, and a dusting of dark hair crowned his head. "Hello," Emily whispered, touching one tiny cheek with a trembling finger. "Hello, little warrior." Behind her, Daniel had gone very still. When Emily glanced back at him, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left the child. "He has fought as hard as you to be here," he said finally, his voice so low Emily barely heard it. The baby squirmed, his tiny mouth opening in what might have been a yawn or a protest. A fierce protectiveness surged through Emily unlike anything she had ever known. Stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than the exhaustion threatening to pull her under. "What will you name him?" Margaret asked as she continued working, cleaning and checking Emily for further complications. Emily looked down at her son, this miracle who had survived against all odds, just as she had. The name came to her with perfect clarity. "Noah," she said. "His name is Noah, for new beginnings after the storm." Margaret nodded in approval. "A good name, a true name." She finished her ministrations and stepped back, suddenly looking every one of her years. "Now you both must rest. The hardest part is done, but healing takes time." As Margaret gathered her herbs and cloths, Daniel carefully extracted himself from behind Emily, arranging pillows to support her back. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said, his voice rough with some emotion Emily couldn't identify. "If you need anything in the night, call out." Emily caught his wrist before he could retreat completely. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. "I don't know why you stopped at that cabin tonight, but—" Daniel looked down at her hand on his wrist, then met her eyes directly. "Some paths are chosen for us," he said simply. "I was meant to find you." He hesitated, then added, "Your husband. He will look for you when he discovers you're not where he left you." Emily's arms tightened around Noah. "Jack thinks I'm as good as dead. He won't waste time searching for a corpse." But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Jack Parker was not a man who left loose ends. "He doesn't know about this place," Daniel assured her. "Few do. This valley doesn't appear on any maps. The mining company surveyed 20 miles in every direction and missed it completely. That's why we chose it." A shadow crossed his face. "My grandmother and I, after I lost my position with the Wildlife Service, after other things happened, we needed somewhere safe." He glanced toward the window where the first faint lightening of the sky suggested dawn was approaching. "You should sleep while you can. The baby will wake hungry soon enough." As he turned away, Emily settled deeper into the bed, cradling her, son against her heart. Outside, the wind had died completely, and silence blanketed the hidden valley. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily Winters closed her eyes without fear of what morning might bring. Emily woke to sunlight streaming through pine-framed windows and the rich aroma of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see the familiar water stains on the ceiling of the bedroom she shared with Jack. Instead, her gaze fell upon smooth timber walls adorned with traditional Lakota artwork and modern photographs. Reality rushed. Back the cabin, the rescue, the birth. She looked down quickly. Noah slept peacefully beside her, swaddled in a soft blanket patterned with geometric designs in blues and reds. Someone, Margaret presumably, had placed the infant in a beautifully crafted wooden cradle lined with rabbit fur, creating a perfect nest for the newborn. "He has eaten twice while you slept," Margaret's voice came from nearby. The older woman sat in a rocking chair by the window, threading beads onto a thin leather cord. "Good appetite, strong suck. He will thrive." Emily pushed herself up, wincing at the soreness that seemed to permeate every inch of her body. "How long did I sleep?" "Almost a full day," Margaret replied, setting aside her beadwork. "Your body needed it. The birth was hard and you were already weakened." Memories of the cabin flooded back, Jack's rage, Caleb's knife connecting with her ribs, the endless hours alone in the dark. Emily shuddered. "How bad are my injuries?" Margaret crossed to the bed and helped Emily sit fully upright, her weathered hands gentle but firm. "2 ribs bruised, not broken. The cut on your side is clean, no infection. Your womb is strong, the child made sure of that." She smiled slightly. "You are stronger than they knew." "Where's Daniel?" Emily asked, suddenly aware of his absence. checking the perimeter and his trail cameras. The storm has passed, but others may come. We must be watchful. Margaret poured a cup of something steaming from a kettle on the wood stove and brought it to Emily. "Drink this. It will help your milk come in." The tea was bitter but not unpleasant, with hints of anise and something earthy beneath. Emily sipped it slowly, her gaze drifting around the cabin. In daylight, she could see details she'd missed in the chaos of the previous night. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled not just with books, but with specimens, rocks, feathers, pressed, plants between glass plates. A large desk beneath the window held papers covered in neat handwriting, maps marked with colored pins, and what appeared to be wildlife tracking data. This was not the home of a simple hunter, but of a scientist. Daniel was not always just a conservation officer, Margaret said, following Emily's gaze. He has a doctorate in wildlife biology from Montana. He was the head researcher for the Grey Wolf reintroduction program. Emily recalled what Daniel had said about returning to the reservation. "What happened?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her usual caution. Margaret's face hardened. "Politics happened. When Daniel insisted on incorporating traditional Lakota knowledge of wolf behavior into the research methodology, the state officials overruled him. When he continued anyway, they dismissed him, claiming budget cuts." She shook her head. "He returned to the reservation, but things had changed there too. Many of our own people looked at him differently, too white for the Lakota, too Lakota for the whites." "So you came here?" Emily finished. "Not at first." Margaret turned away, busying herself with something on the stove. There was a woman, an environmental lawyer working with the tribe. They were to marry. Emily waited, sensing there was more to the story, perhaps the explanation for the sorrow she sometimes glimpsed in Daniel's eyes. But Margaret seemed to have said all she intended to. The older woman brought a bowl of broth to the bedside and helped Emily hold it steady. "Eat now. Questions later. Healing first." Emily complied, recognizing the wisdom in the directive. The broth was flavorful and warming, settling comfortably. In her empty stomach, as she ate, Noah stirred, tiny fists punching the air as he emerged from sleep, his face scrunched, turning that alarming shade of red that preceded a wail. Before Emily could react, Margaret was there, lifting the infant with practiced ease. "Finish your food," she instructed Emily. "Then we will teach you how to feed him properly." What followed was an education unlike any Emily had received before. Margaret guided her through nursing, showing her how to position the baby, how to ensure a proper latch, and how to burp him afterward. The old woman's manner was direct, unsentimental, but undeniably kind. She treated motherhood not as some mystical transformation, but as a practical skill to be learned through instruction and practice. Many women struggle because no one teaches them, Margaret explained as she demonstrated how to swaddle Noah. They are expected to know by magic, foolishness. Even wolf mothers learn from the pack. By mid-afternoon, Emily felt both exhausted and strangely empowered. She had fed her son twice successfully and changed the simple cloth diaper Margaret had fashioned. Each small accomplishment felt like reclaiming a piece of herself from the helplessness that had defined her life with Jack. The door opened, admitting a gust of pine-scented air, and Daniel, his coat dusted with fresh snow from the higher elevations. He carried a canvas pack and what appeared to be several trail cameras. "Perimeter is secure," he reported to his grandmother. "No signs of human activity within 5 miles. His eyes found Emily immediately, assessing her condition with a quick glance. "You're awake. Good. How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Emily admitted, "but alive." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Alive is good." He crossed to the cradle where Noah slept and gazed down at him, his expression softening. He seems well. Thanks to you and your grandmother, Emily said. I don't know how to repay you. Daniel glanced at her sharply. There is no debt between us. Daniel doesn't believe in owning or being owned, Margaret interjected, taking the pack from him and beginning to unpack trail supplies. Not people, not favors, not land. It makes him a poor businessman but a good man. A comfortable silence fell as Daniel washed at the basin near the door, then moved to help his grandmother with meal preparation. Emily watched them work together, their movements synchronized by years of shared living. There was an easy companionship between them that made her chest ache, with a curious mixture of admiration and envy. Jack will come looking eventually, she said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since she woke. When he realizes I'm not in that cabin, dead or alive, he'll search. He's not a man who leaves loose ends. Daniel and Margaret exchanged a glance that seemed to carry an entire conversation. Finally, Daniel set down the knife he'd been using and turned to face her fully. Let him look, he said, his voice level. This valley doesn't exist on any map. The stream that feeds it runs underground for 3 miles before emerging. There are no trails except game paths that disappear with the first snow. He gestured toward the window where fat snowflakes had begun to fall again. Winter comes early to these mountains. By tomorrow, any tracks we left will be buried. And if he finds us anyway? Emily pressed, needing to hear the answer. Daniel's expression hardened, a transformation so subtle yet complete that Emily was suddenly reminded this man was not just a scientist and healer, but a hunter. Then he will discover that not all Lakota are as easily dismissed as he might believe. Margaret muttered something in their language that made Daniel's jaw tighten, but he didn't respond to whatever she'd said. Instead, he returned to preparing the meal, though his movements had lost their easy rhythm. As the afternoon deepened into evening, another snowstorm descended upon the hidden valley. Wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, but inside, warmth and the savory scent of venison stew created a cocoon of comfort. Noah nursed and slept, untroubled by the storm or the tensions of the adult world. Emily found herself drifting in and out of sleep, her body demanding rest to heal. Just before full dark, as Daniel lit the lamps around the cabin, he paused beside her bed. "You'll be safe here," he said quietly, as if he'd heard her unspoken fears. "Both of you. I promise." In her old life, Emily had learned that promises were just words, easily spoken and easily broken. But something in Daniel's steady gaze made her want to believe him. Not because he was a man, and men were to be obeyed, but because he was a person who seemed to understand the weight and worth of his word. "Thank you," she said simply. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, snow driving against the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. But within the cabin's walls, a different sort of weather was brewing, something tentative and fragile, like the first green shoots after a prairie fire. Emily didn't have a name for it yet, but as she cradled Noah against her heart, she recognized it as something she had thought lost forever. Hope. Days melted into weeks as winter claimed the mountains. The first snowstorm gave way to others, each blanketing the hidden valley in deeper silence. Emily's world contracted to the confines of the cabin, but unlike her imprisonment in Jack's house, this confinement felt like sanctuary rather than captivity. Her body healed slowly. The bruises faded from violent purple to sickly yellow, then disappeared altogether. Her ribs still ached when she moved too quickly, but Margaret's herbal poultices and Daniel's careful adjustments, his hands firm but gentle as he manipulated the damaged bones back into alignment, accelerated her recovery. Noah thrived despite his early arrival. Each day brought new revelations. The darkening of his eyes to a deep brown, the surprising strength of his grip around Emily's finger, the first hints of expressions that weren't simply reflex, but response. Emily often found herself studying her son's features, searching for traces of herself and finding them in the curve of Noah's upper lip, the shape of his ears. She never looked for Jack in her son's face. That part of Noah's heritage was something Emily silently vowed to bury as deeply as the snow had buried the world outside. One morning, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Emily woke to find herself alone in the cabin. A note in Daniel's precise handwriting sat beside a pot of tea on the small table near her bed. Gone to check winter kill with grandmother, back by noon, wood stacked by stove. Rest. She smiled at the last instruction, so typical of his concise manner. Rest had become her primary occupation these past weeks, though increasingly she had begun to help with small tasks, chopping vegetables for the evening stew, mending tears in clothing, even learning to make the fry bread that Margaret prepared each morning. Simple actions, but each one rebuilt her confidence, reminding her that she had been capable once before Jack had systematically stripped that belief from her. With Noah fed and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Emily indulged her curiosity about her temporary home. Daniel and Margaret had given her free rein of the cabin, making no attempt to restrict her movements or hide their possessions, but her initial weakness had limited her exploration. Now she moved slowly around the single large room, examining the objects that filled the shelves. The books covered subjects from wildlife biology to astronomy, indigenous medicine to environmental law. Many had university library stamps, Daniel's prizes from his student days perhaps. Among them sat stranger items, a fossilized wolf tooth, a chunk of blue-white mineral that caught the light like frozen lightning, a collection of arrowheads arranged by size and shape. A small wooden box beneath the window drew her attention. Unlike the other furnishings, it was ornately carved with symbols she didn't recognize, spirals and animal shapes intertwined in a complex pattern. She hesitated, reluctant to pry into anything truly private, but the lid was unlocked, sitting slightly ajar as if inviting inspection. Inside lay a collection of personal treasures, a beaded medallion of extraordinary craftsmanship, a small photograph in a silver frame showing a younger Daniel in formal attire, standing beside a smiling white woman with auburn hair, a folded letter on Department of Interior letterhead, and beneath it all, a tiny pair of moccasins sized for an infant no larger than Noah. "My grandsons," Margaret's voice came from the doorway, startling Emily so badly she nearly dropped the box. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting it down. "I shouldn't have—" Margaret waved away her apology, stamping snow from her boots before crossing to the fire. "If we didn't want you to see, we would have locked it." She unwound the scarf from her neck, her eyes on the tiny moccasins Emily had been holding. "Daniel was just learning to walk when I made those for him." Emily's throat tightened. "They're beautiful." "They were his sons too, for a time," Margaret said quietly, hanging her outer garments near the stove to dry. "His son," Emily repeated, surprised. "Michael, the little one, lived 4 months. Margaret's voice held no self-pity, only a matter-of-fact acceptance that somehow made the tragedy more profound. "Pneumonia. The clinic had no antibiotics that month. Budget cuts, they said." Daniel entered carrying several winter-killed rabbits, his coat heavy with melting snow. He assessed the scene, Emily standing by the box, Margaret warming her hands by the fire, and his expression shifted minutely. "I see grandmother has been sharing our ghosts," he said, hanging the game on a hook near the door. "She was curious," Margaret replied. "Curiosity is the beginning of understanding." Emily carefully closed the box lid. "I apologize for intruding." Daniel shook his head. "There are no secrets here, except those you choose to keep." He glanced at the photograph she had returned to the box. "That was Allison. We were engaged 5 years ago." "What happened?" Emily asked before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed his face. "Her firm happened," When the partners learned their star environmental attorney planned to marry a Lakota and move to the reservation, they made it clear her career would suffer. Her last email said she'd accepted a position with a corporate law firm in Seattle. The simple statement held volumes of pain beneath its surface. Emily understood suddenly why Daniel had been so quick to help her, why he recognized the desperation in her eyes that night in the cabin. He too knew what it meant to have choices stolen by those who believed they held power over others' lives. "Tell her about the research program," Margaret prompted, as she took the rabbits from Daniel and began preparing them for cooking. Daniel's mouth tightened, but after a moment he continued. "I was leading the Grey Wolf Reintroduction Program, combining Western scientific methods with traditional ecological knowledge. The wolves were thriving, especially in territories where we applied Lakota understanding of pack dynamics and hunting patterns. The government officials didn't like that," Emily guessed. "They accused me of introducing unverifiable mysticism into the research methodology." His voice was even, but his hands betrayed his anger, clenching briefly before relaxing with visible effort. "When I published a paper documenting how traditional knowledge improved survival rates compared to standard approaches, they terminated the program." Margaret snorted derisively. "Science, they meant control." Noah stirred in his cradle, making soft mewling sounds that preceded full waking. Emily crossed to him, lifting the infant and cradling him close. As always, the weight of her son in her arms centered her, a tangible reminder of what mattered most. "Jack convinced my stepfather that he was doing us a favor by marrying me," she said quietly, offering her own story in exchange for theirs. "My mother had died 3 years earlier. The ranch was failing. Jack offered to clear his debts in exchange for my hand." Daniel watched her, his gaze steady and non-judgmental. "And your stepfather agreed?" "He didn't ask if I wanted to marry a man 15 years older," Emily continued, the words coming easier than she expected. "He just told me it was happening. The ceremony was 2 days later. I became Mrs. Parker before I had time to understand what that meant." "The first beating?" Margaret asked bluntly, her hands never pausing in their work. Emily swallowed. 3 weeks after the wedding, I answered a call from my college roommate. He said I was being disrespectful by making private plans. She looked down at Noah, who had settled against her chest. "After that, there was always a reason. I spoke too loudly. I was too friendly with the ranch hands. I didn't smile enough. When his business associates visited." "And when did you become pregnant?" Daniel's voice was gentle. "He stopped hitting my face," Emily replied. "Started using his boots instead. Said no one would see the bruises that way." She took a deep breath. "I tried to run once, early on. He caught me before I reached the main road. After that, you just tried to survive until he discovered you were planning to leave again," Daniel concluded. Emily nodded. "He found the bus tickets I'd hidden in my Bible. I was saving money a few cents at a time, enough for a ticket to my aunt's place in Minnesota." Her voice caught. "He said I was ungrateful, that everything he'd done was for my own good. Then he and Caleb took me to that hunting cabin." She trailed off, unable to continue. The memory of those hours alone in the darkness, certain she was dying, was still too raw. "What kind of man is this husband of yours?" Daniel asked after a moment. "Powerful," Emily answered, "at least in Whitetail County. He owns the largest ranch, has friends in the sheriff's department, employs half the men in town. His grandfather was one of the first settlers in the territory. A man accustomed to taking what he wants," Daniel observed, "and eliminating what displeases him," Emily added. "There's a reason no one crosses Jack Parker, not even the law." Margaret brought a cup of steaming tea to Emily. Her ancient eyes were filled with a wisdom that transcended cultural differences. "Men like that never stop hunting what they believe belongs to them," she said, "even when the hunting makes no sense. The truth of the statement settled heavy in Emily's chest. Jack would look for her eventually, not out of love or concern, but because he couldn't bear the thought of something that was his escaping his grasp. "I can't stay here forever," she said, voicing the thought that had been growing since she first began to heal. "I'm putting you both in danger just by being here." "Spring is months away," Daniel countered. "The passes won't clear until April. At the earliest. Until then, no one is finding this valley, not with 4 feet of snow covering every approach." "And after spring," Emily pressed. "What then?" Daniel and Margaret exchanged a glance, laden with unspoken communication. Finally, Margaret nodded once and returned to her cooking. "We've been discussing that," Daniel admitted. "I have connections. With the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, they would welcome you and Noah. Parker's influence doesn't extend that far." Montana. The idea seemed simultaneously terrifying and liberating, a complete severance from everything she had known. "I don't know the first thing about living in such a place." "You know how to survive," Margaret said without turning from her work. "Everything else can be learned." The conversation was interrupted by a sound from outside, the distant rumble of an engine. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward the window. Where twilight was settling over the valley, Daniel moved quickly to the far wall, retrieving a high-powered spotting scope from a shelf. He positioned it by the window, scanning the ridge above. "Snowmobile," he reported, his voice tense. "Single rider, coming down the eastern slope." "Could be Ethan making his monthly supply run," Margaret suggested, though she had already moved to secure Noah's cradle out of direct line of sight from the windows. Daniel continued to track the approaching vehicle. "It's not Ethan's machine. This one's newer, red." Emily's blood ran cold. "Caleb has a red Arctic cat, brand new. Jack gave it to him for Christmas." Daniel's expression hardened. "Stay inside, away from the windows." He moved to a locked cabinet, retrieving a rifle and checking its action with practiced efficiency. "You think it's him?" Emily asked, clutching Noah tighter. "I think we should be certain," Daniel replied, pulling on his coat. "If it's your brother-in-law, he didn't find this place by accident." Margaret took Noah from Emily's arms. "I'll keep him quiet and hidden," she assured Emily. "Go with Daniel to the back room. Stay low." Daniel led Emily to what she had assumed was a storage area. Inside, she was surprised to find a small but well-equipped second room with its own wood stove, a narrow bed, and a window that overlooked the approach to the cabin from a different angle. "My observatory," Daniel explained briefly, "for wildlife monitoring." He positioned Emily away from the window, then took up a position where he could see the approaching snowmobile without being seen. The minutes stretched, the only sound the muffled roar of the machine growing steadily closer. "It's Caleb," Daniel confirmed grimly. "Alone, as far as I can tell." Emily's heart raced. "How did he find us?" "That's what I intend to find out." Daniel's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, don't come out until I call for you." Before Emily could protest, he was gone, moving through the cabin with silent purpose. Through the small window, she watched him position himself behind a stand of pine trees, the rifle at the ready, but not yet raised. The snowmobile's engine grew louder, then cut suddenly as it reached the clearing before the cabin. In the stillness that followed, Emily could hear the crunch of boots on snow. A familiar voice called out, "Hello? Anybody here? I'm looking for Emily Parker. Please, I need help." Caleb sounded desperate, nothing like the coldly efficient man who had helped Jack beat her and lock her in that cabin. Emily crept closer to the window, careful to stay hidden while trying to see her brother-in-law. Caleb stood in the clearing, unarmed, his hands raised in what appeared to be surrender. His face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut. "I know she's here," he called again. "Please, I'm not with Jack, I swear it. He tried to kill me too." Daniel emerged from his concealment, the rifle pointed steadily at Caleb's chest. "That's far enough," he commanded. "How did you find this place?" Caleb's shoulders slumped with what looked like relief at seeing another person, even one holding him at gunpoint. "I was Fish and Wildlife before Jack hired me," he explained, his voice carrying in the clear mountain air. "I know these mountains, known about this valley for years, just never had reason to come here." He paused, coughing painfully. "Please, Jack thinks I helped Emily escape. He doesn't know I'm alive either." Daniel didn't lower the rifle. "And why should I believe you?" Caleb slowly reached into his coat pocket. Daniel tensed, but all Caleb withdrew was a small silver object that caught the fading light. "I brought this," he said. "It's Emily's, her father's St. Christopher medal. Jack took it from her that night. I thought she might want it back. From her hidden vantage point," Emily gasped softly. The medal had been her father's, given to him during his deployment. It was the one thing of his she had managed to keep hidden from Jack, until that final night when he had torn it from her neck. Daniel stood motionless, evaluating Caleb with predatory focus. "Wait there," he finally said. "Don't move." He backed toward the cabin, never taking his eyes or his rifle off Caleb. Moments later, Emily heard Daniel's quiet voice from the main room, conferring with Margaret. Then the door to the observatory opened. "He's asking for you," Daniel said. "Says Jack tried to kill him too." "Do you believe him?" Emily asked. Daniel's expression was unreadable. "I believe he's injured. Beyond that," he shrugged. "Your call. You know him better than I do." Emily considered the situation carefully. Caleb had always been different from Jack. Quieter, less openly cruel. There had been moments during her 2 years of marriage when he'd seemed uncomfortable with his brother's behavior, though he'd never directly intervened. Once he'd warned her to stay out of sight when Jack returned home drunk from a business trip. Another time, he'd left pain medication on the kitchen counter after Jack had dislocated her shoulder. Small kindnesses in a sea of indifference, but they stood out in her memory. "I'll talk to him," she decided. "But not alone." Daniel nodded, his face impassive. "Stay behind me at all times." When they stepped onto the porch, Caleb was still standing where Daniel had left him, hands visible, the silver medal glinting between his fingers. His face registered shock when he saw Emily, her son cradled protectively in her arms. "You had the baby," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Jack said it died with you." "That's what he wanted to happen," Emily replied coldly. "Why? Are you here, Caleb? The truth." Caleb's gaze dropped to the ground, then back up to meet hers. "To warn you. Jack knows you're alive. A hunter found blood in the cabin, but not enough. He's been searching ever since." "And how did you find us?" Daniel pressed, rifle still at the ready. "Like I said, I used to work Fish and Wildlife before Jack hired me to manage the ranch's hunting leases. I knew about this valley. It's outside normal patrol routes, unmarked on most maps." He gestured toward his snowmobile. "I've been looking for 3 days. Figured if someone helped Emily, they'd need somewhere isolated." "That doesn't explain why Jack tried to kill you," Emily pointed out. Caleb's hand went unconsciously to his bruised face. "I made a mistake. Started asking questions after they found the blood. Why we left you out there, why we didn't make sure." He swallowed. "Jack doesn't like questions." The explanation rang true. Jack Parker's temper was legendary, even his. Loyal brother wouldn't be immune if he stepped out of line. Daniel and Emily exchanged a glance. "What happened?" Daniel asked, his tone marginally less hostile. 2 nights ago, Jack called me to his study, said he needed to discuss loose ends." Caleb's voice grew distant. "I thought he meant the ranch's finances. Instead, he started talking about you, Emily. How unfortunate it was that wild animals had probably gotten to your body before he could give you a proper burial." Caleb looked down at the medal in his palm. He was drunk, more than usual. Kept saying how he'd arranged a perfect cover story. Grieving widower loses pregnant wife to exposure during the worst storm in a decade. He even had a small funeral planned. "What changed?" Emily asked. "He saw me looking at this." Caleb held up the St. Christopher medal. Asked why I'd kept it. I said it wasn't right, what we did to you, that you deserved better. The admission hung in the cold air between them. "He went crazy," Caleb continued. "Started beating me, saying I'd always been weak, always been a liability. Said he should have gotten rid of me years ago after our parents died." His voice trembled slightly. "I managed to get away, grab some supplies. Been hiding in an old line shack on the eastern range until I could find you." "Why not go to the sheriff?" Daniel asked skeptically. Caleb gave a bitter laugh that ended in a pained cough. "Sheriff Taylor? He and Jack have been best friends since high school. Jack's the one who funded his campaign. Besides, it would be my word against his, and Jack's the grieving husband who just buried his wife." Noah began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching with displeasure at the cold. Emily instinctively moved to shield him from the wind. "You should come inside," Margaret's voice came from behind them. The old woman stood in the doorway, a shotgun held casually but competently in her weathered hands. "The child shouldn't be in this cold, and night is falling." Daniel glanced at his grandmother, then back at Caleb. After a moment's consideration, he lowered his rifle slightly. "You can come in, but you'll surrender any weapons first." Caleb nodded, then slowly reached inside his jacket to produce a small handgun. "Just this, for protection on the trail." He placed it on the ground and stepped back. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I swear it." Daniel retrieved the weapon, checked that it was unloaded, and gestured for Caleb to precede them into the cabin. As they entered, Margaret took Noah from Emily, murmuring soothing words to calm his fussing. The contrast between the frigid outdoors and the cabin's warmth was dramatic. Caleb stood awkwardly just inside the door, like a man unsure of his welcome, which Emily supposed he was. "Sit," Margaret directed, indicating a chair far from any potential weapons. "I'll check those injuries." Caleb obeyed without question, removing his heavy coat to reveal more bruising on his neck and what looked like knife wounds on his forearm. "He used his hunting knife," Caleb explained, seeing Emily's shocked expression. "Said he'd gut me like a deer." Margaret examined the wounds with clinical detachment. "These need cleaning. Infection is already starting." She moved to her medicine cabinet, selecting herbs and bandages with practiced efficiency. Daniel positioned himself between Caleb and the rest of the cabin, his stance protective. Why warn Emily? Why not just disappear, start over somewhere else? "Because Jack won't stop," Caleb replied, wincing as Margaret began cleaning his wounds with an herbal solution. "He's obsessed now. Thinks Emily betrayed him by surviving. And now there's the baby, a complication to his perfect cover story." He looked directly at Emily. "You know how he is. He can't stand losing control of anything he considers his." Emily nodded slowly. The Jack Parker she knew was pathologically possessive of his land, his business, his reputation, and especially of her. Her escape wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a challenge to his authority, his ownership. "What is he planning?" she asked quietly. "He's organized a search party. 20 men, well armed, told everyone they're looking for evidence of what happened to you, to bring closure. But I heard him talking to his foreman when he thought I wasn't listening." Caleb's voice dropped. He said, if they found an Indian with a white baby, they should handle it quietly, make it look like an accident. Daniel's expression darkened. "And when does this search begin?" 3 days from now, when the weather clears. They're bringing dogs." Emily's blood ran cold. "They'll find the trail from the cabin. Eventually," Caleb acknowledged, "the dogs will follow it as far as they can. Once they reach Daniel's truck tracks, they'll have a direction." Margaret finished bandaging Caleb's arm and moved away, her face betraying nothing of her thoughts. She returned to Noah, who had settled in his cradle, checking him with a grandmother's careful attention. "We need to leave," Emily said, voicing the conclusion they'd all reached. All of us, Daniel nodded grimly. The question is where? The northern pass is still blocked with snow. The eastern route would take us directly through Parker's search. Grid, west, Caleb suggested, across the reservation border. Jack won't follow there. Too many witnesses, too much visibility. The reservation has its own problems, Daniel countered. Tribal police are understaffed, and federal agents rarely respond to complaints involving non-tribal members. What? About south? Emily asked. Toward the state line? Daniel considered this. It's the longest route, but potentially the safest. If we could reach Highway 85, we'd have options, east to Pierre or south to Nebraska. Jack has friends at every roadblock and checkpoint in a 100-mile radius, Caleb warned. He's called in favors with state police, game wardens, everyone. The USE. Reality of their situation settled over the room like a physical weight. They were trapped in a valley that had been sanctuary, but might soon become a prison. There's another option, Margaret said suddenly, breaking her silence. All eyes turned to her. The old uranium mine, Daniel frowned. Grandmother, that's been abandoned for decades. Yes, she agreed calmly, which is why no one goes there. The access road collapsed 20 years ago, but the supply tunnel still runs from the northern ridge to the mining camp 6 miles beyond. It was used during winter when the main road was blocked. A tunnel? Emily repeated, hope kindling. Margaret nodded. My father helped build it. Concrete-lined, large enough for supply trucks. The mining company sealed the entrances when they had left, but hunters reopened the northern access years ago. They use it as a shelter in bad weather. Daniel's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration. If it's still passable, it would bypass the search area completely. And lead where? Caleb asked. To the old mining camp, Margaret replied. From there, a logging road runs southeast to the highway, 30 miles but away from Parker's territory. Emily looked at Daniel. Could we make it? With Noah? He was quiet for a moment, mentally calculating. If the tunnel is intact, yes. It would take a full day to reach the highway. We'd need supplies, warmth for the baby. I have everything we need, Margaret stated with quiet confidence. I've prepared for such journeys before. The unspoken history behind that simple statement hung in the air, a reminder that Margaret Blackhawk had survived her own flights from danger in years past. Caleb stood carefully, mindful of his injuries. I should go. Jack will have noticed. My snowmobile is missing. If I return with a story about checking the line shacks, I might be able to feed you information about the search plans. That's too dangerous, Emily protested, surprising herself with her concern for the man who had once helped imprison her. It's our best chance, Caleb countered. Jack still trusts his foreman and the other men, but they only know what he tells them. I can find out the real plans, maybe even delay them. Daniel studied Caleb with narrowed eyes. Why would you risk that for us? Caleb looked at Emily, then at Noah's sleeping form. Because I stood by once when I should have acted. I won't make that mistake again. He turned to Daniel. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to do something right for once. The simple sincerity of his words seemed to reach Daniel, who gave a slight nod. If you're captured or Jack suspects, head for the northern ridge. There's an old hunting blind 50 yards east of the lightning-struck pine. Wait there. I understand. Caleb reached into his pocket and held out Emily's medal. This belongs with you, not him. Emily accepted the St. Christopher, its familiar weight both comforting and painful in her palm. Be careful, Caleb. You too, Emily. He glanced at Noah once more. He looks like you. Strong. That's good. With those words, Caleb retrieved his coat and moved toward the door. Daniel followed him out, presumably to ensure his departure and secure the perimeter afterward. Emily looked down at the medal in her hand, the last gift from her father before his deployment. She'd believed it lost forever, Another piece of her self-sacrifice to Jack's cruelty. Its return felt symbolic, a reclaiming of something precious thought destroyed. "Your brother-in-law carries much shame," Margaret observed, joining Emily by the window. "It eats at him like a sickness." "Do you believe him?" Emily asked. "About wanting to help?" Margaret's weathered face revealed nothing of her thoughts. "I believe he wants redemption. Whether he has the courage to earn it remains to be seen." After Caleb's departure, preparation for their own journey began with urgent efficiency. Margaret directed operations like a general, her decades of survival experience evident in every decision. Essential supplies were gathered and packed into manageable bundles: food, medical supplies, extra clothing, tools. Daniel retrieved topographical maps from his desk, spreading them across the table to plot their route. "The tunnel entrance is here," he indicated, pointing to a spot on the northern ridge. "If Margaret's memory is correct, it runs 4 miles beneath the mountain to exit here, near the old mining camp." Emily studied the maps, trying to memorize the key landmarks. Noah slept peacefully in his cradle, unaware of the urgency surrounding him. "How do we keep him warm during the journey?" she asked, the practical concern of a new mother overshadowing even her fear of Jack. "I've been making this," Margaret said, bringing out what looked like a modified traditional cradle board. Unlike the simple wooden structure Emily had seen in museums, this was lined with insulated material, with a protective covering that could be drawn over the top. "Modern materials, old design. It will keep him warm against your body, protected from wind and snow." Emily touched the carrier reverently, noting the intricate beadwork Margaret had incorporated despite the practical modifications. "It's beautiful. Beauty and function together," Margaret replied. "One need not sacrifice the other." Daniel returned to the maps. "Once we reach the mining camp, we'll need to move quickly. The logging road hasn't been maintained, but it should be passable. If we push hard, we can reach the highway by nightfall the day after tomorrow." "And then?" Emily asked. The question that had lingered since her rescue finally needed addressing. What came after escape? Where could she and Noah go that Jack couldn't eventually find them? Daniel met her eyes directly. "I have a friend in Pierre, Sam Eaglefeather. He works for the State Attorney General's office, specializing in domestic violence cases. He can help with emergency protective orders, safe housing, legal counsel." Emily felt a flicker of hope. Legal protection had seemed impossible while trapped in Whitetail County, where Jack's influence extended to every office of authority. But at the state level, perhaps there were people beyond his reach. Will it be enough? She wondered aloud. "Jack has money, connections. Sam has prosecuted men like Parker before," Daniel assured her. "Men who thought their power made them untouchable. What he needs is evidence." Emily unconsciously touched her ribs, where the bruises from Jack's final beating were still fading. "I have plenty of that." "And a witness," Daniel added, nodding toward the door through which Caleb had departed. "If he's truly committed to standing against his brother," the uncertainty of that "if" hung in the air between them. Caleb's redemption was far from assured, his courage untested. Yet without his warning, they would have remained unaware of the approaching danger until it was too late. They worked through the evening, packing and planning with the focused intensity of those who know time is limited. Margaret prepared special provisions for Noah, herbal remedies to soothe him if he became colicky during their journey, cloth diapers designed for optimal warmth and minimal bulk. As midnight approached, Daniel insisted Emily rest while he took first watch. "We leave before dawn," he reminded her. "You'll need your strength." Too exhausted to argue, Emily settled on the narrow bed, Noah in his cradle beside her. Despite her physical fatigue, her mind raced with scenarios, both hopeful and terrifying. What if the tunnel had collapsed? What if Jack's men found them on the logging road? What if Caleb betrayed them? She must have voiced these fears aloud, for suddenly Margaret was beside her, her weathered hand cool against Emily's forehead. "Fear is the mind's way of preparing for danger," the old woman said softly. "Listen to it, learn from it, then set it aside. It has done its work." The simple wisdom in those words settled something in Emily's churning thoughts. She closed her eyes, one hand resting on Noah's cradle, and surrendered to exhaustion. Dreams came, vivid and strange. She was running through endless corridors of pine trees, Jack's voice echoing behind her. Then Daniel was there, leading her toward a light that seemed impossibly distant. Noah cried somewhere she couldn't reach, his wails growing more desperate with each step. Emily woke with a start, heart pounding. The cabin was dark, except for the low glow from the wood stove. Noah slept soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of infant dreams. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the occasional crack of branches, bearing the weight of snow. Unable to return to sleep, Emily rose quietly and wrapped herself in a blanket. Daniel sat by the window, rifle across his knees, his profile sharp in the moonlight that filtered through the glass. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "Bad dreams," she admitted, joining him by the window. The valley below was transformed into a fairy landscape, every surface coated in ice that glittered like diamonds in the moonlight. It was beautiful and alien and utterly indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its boundaries. "What was it like?" she asked suddenly, "growing up here with all this?" Daniel seemed surprised by the question, but considered it thoughtfully. "Freedom," he said finally. "These mountains don't care who your ancestors were or what color your skin is. They judge you only on whether you respect their power." He gestured toward the vast wilderness before them. "Out there, I was never the Indian kid or the reservation boy. I was just Daniel, learning to read the land, to move through it without disturbing its rhythms." "It sounds peaceful," Emily said wistfully. A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. "It was, until I had to leave it for school, for college. Then I learned that the rest of the world doesn't operate by the same rules." Emily understood that lesson all too well. Her own education in the world's unfairness had come at Jack's hands, in the slow, systematic destruction of her independence, her confidence, her sense of self. "If we make it through this," she said slowly, "I want Noah to have what you had, that freedom, the chance to know who he is before the world tells him who he should be." Daniel's gaze, when it met hers, held an intensity that made her breath catch. "He will," he promised. Not empty reassurance, but a declaration of intent. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the moon completed its arc across the star-filled sky. Emily found herself studying Daniel's profile, noting the strength in his jaw, the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet dignity in his bearing. He was nothing like Jack, not just in his appearance or heritage, but in something fundamental. Where Jack consumed, Daniel preserved. Where Jack dominated, Daniel protected. The realization brought a confusing mix of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, for his rescue and continued protection. But something else too, something unexpected and fragile that she wasn't ready to name. Dawn approached with subtle shifts in the quality of darkness. Margaret rose without a sound, moving through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. By the time the first pale light touched the eastern ridge, they were prepared to depart. Noah, fed and changed, was secured in the modified cradleboard against Emily's chest. The design distributed his weight comfortably while keeping him close. To her body heat, a soft wool cap protected his tiny ears from the cold, and the carrier's hood could be drawn forward to shield his face when necessary. Daniel shouldered the heaviest pack, containing tools they might need to clear obstacles. In the tunnel, along with emergency supplies, should they become trapped. Margaret carried medicinal herbs, food, and extra clothing. Emily, still recovering from childbirth and encumbered with Noah, carried only a small pack with essentials for the baby. As they prepared to leave the cabin that had been sanctuary for nearly a month, Emily felt a curious mixture of regret and determination. This place had witnessed her healing, Noah's first weeks of life, and the slow rebuilding of her confidence. Yet it could not be home, not with Jack's shadow looming ever closer. "We'll return someday," Margaret said, as if reading her thoughts. "When it's safe. This place has sheltered many who needed refuge over the years. It will wait for us." They left as the sun crested the eastern mountains, locking the cabin behind them. The cold was intense but manageable, the snow crisp beneath their snowshoes. Daniel led the way, breaking trail through fresh powder that had fallen overnight. Margaret followed, her pace steady despite her age. Emily came last, one hand supporting Noah in his carrier, the other gripping a walking staff Daniel had fashioned for her. Their progress was necessarily slow, especially as they began to ascend. The northern ridge. The terrain grew steeper, the snow deeper in drifts that reached past their knees in places. Twice they paused to rest and check on Noah, who remained mercifully quiet, lulled by the rhythm of Emily's movement and the security of his carrier. By mid-morning, they had reached a plateau that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. Emily turned for one last look at the cabin, now a tiny dark speck against the vastness of white. From this distance, it seemed impossibly fragile, a small human assertion in a landscape that could erase it with a single avalanche. "There!" Daniel pointed ahead to where a stand of pines grew in an unnaturally straight line. "The old miners planted those as a windbreak. The tunnel entrance should be just beyond." They trudged forward, the wind picking up as they moved from the relative shelter of the ridge's lee side. Noah began to fuss, disturbed by the change in temperature. Emily adjusted his carrier, drawing the protective hood more securely over his face and murmuring soothing words that were swept away by the strengthening gusts. The tree line offered welcome protection from the wind. Beyond it, a steep rock face rose another 50 feet, its surface partially obscured by drifted snow and ice formations that glittered like crystal sculptures in the morning light. "There should be a crevice," Margaret called, moving ahead with surprising agility. Wide enough for supply trucks, the company disguised it with local stone when they sealed it. Daniel followed his grandmother, scanning the rock face with experienced eyes. Emily hung back, focusing on calming Noah, whose cries had grown more insistent. The combination of cold air and interrupted sleep schedule was testing his normally placid temperament. She was so absorbed in soothing her son that she almost missed Daniel's triumphant call. Looking up, she saw he had cleared away a section of snow to reveal what appeared to be a massive slab of rough-hewn granite. Yet as Margaret approached, Emily realized it was actually a cleverly designed door, constructed to blend perfectly with the surrounding stone. "Help me," Daniel requested, and together they cleared more snow from the base of the door. Beneath the drifts, an old metal track emerged, the rails that had once guided the door open and closed. "It hasn't been used recently," Daniel observed, examining the mechanism. Probably frozen shut. He retrieved tools from his pack, a collapsible shovel, ice picks, a small camp axe. Working methodically, he began to clear ice from around the door's edges. Margaret joined him, using a smaller pick with precision born of long experience. Emily, unable to help directly while carrying Noah, positioned herself to block the worst of the wind from reaching them. As she watched them work, a flicker of movement on the ridge they had just traversed caught her eye. She squinted, uncertain if it was simply snow being whipped by the wind. Then she saw it clearly, a distant figure on snowshoes, moving rapidly along their trail. Then another behind it. "Daniel," she called, her voice tight with alarm. "Someone's following us." Daniel dropped his tools and was at Emily's side in an instant, following her gaze to the distant figures now clearly visible against the white landscape. "Two of them," he confirmed grimly, "moving fast." He pulled out his binoculars for a better look. After a moment, his posture relaxed slightly. "It's Caleb. And a woman." "A woman?" Emily's confusion was mirrored in Margaret's face as she joined. "Them. We need to get that door open now," Daniel said, returning to his work with renewed urgency. "Whoever she is, they're being followed. Look." He handed Emily the binoculars. Through the powerful lenses, Emily could see 3 more figures cresting the ridge behind Caleb, still distant, but moving with purpose. She recognized the distinctive gait of Jack's foreman, Ben Hayes, a man almost as dangerous as Jack himself. "It's Hayes," she confirmed, fear constricting her throat. "And 2 others." Margaret had already resumed clearing ice from the door's track. "The mechanism is old, but simple," she explained, working steadily despite the growing urgency. "Once we break the ice, it should slide." Daniel attacked the frozen hinges with focused intensity, chipping away decades of accumulated ice. Noah's cries grew louder, perhaps sensing the adult's anxiety. Emily rocked him gently, dividing her attention between soothing her son and monitoring the approaching figures. With a sudden crack, the ice around the door's track gave way. Daniel braced himself against the stone face and pushed. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding protest of metal against metal, the door began to move, revealing a black opening beyond. "Inside, quickly," Daniel urged. Holding the heavy door, Margaret entered first, disappearing into the darkness with practiced confidence. Emily followed with Noah clutched tightly to her chest. Daniel remained half outside, watching through the narrow gap. Caleb and the young woman emerged from the tree line, stumbling toward the tunnel entrance. A shot rang out, the sharp crack echoing across the mountainside. Snow erupted at their feet. Daniel's rifle responded with 2 precise shots. Then Caleb and the young woman were stumbling through the door, Daniel right behind them, pushing the heavy stone slab closed with a final grinding protest. In the flashlight's beam, Emily could see Caleb clutching his upper arm, blood seeping between his fingers. The woman was hunched beside him, her face pale with shock and exhaustion. "Lisa," Emily breathed, recognizing the young housekeeper from the ranch. "They found us at the ranch," Caleb gasped, allowing Margaret to examine his wound. "Jack went crazy when he realized I'd warned you. Started beating Lisa, demanding to know if she'd helped you plan to leave." Lisa looked up, her gaze finding Emily's. "I didn't tell him anything," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "But he wouldn't stop. Said he'd make an example of me. Caleb got me out," she continued. "Said you were alive, that we could find you." Her voice broke slightly. "I didn't believe it at first. Everyone said you died in the storm." Daniel secured the door with a metal bar that had been stored nearby. "This will hold them for a while, but we need to move. The tunnel runs 4 miles. To the mining camp. Stay close, follow the tracks." Their small group moved deeper into the tunnel, illuminated by the beams of 2 flashlights. As they walked, Caleb explained how Jack had discovered his betrayal, finding the missing St. Christopher medal and piecing together what had happened. "He's organizing a search party," Caleb warned. 20 men well armed. They're bringing dogs. After about a mile, they reached a junction where the main tunnel continued straight, while a smaller passage branched to the left. "Ventilation shaft," Margaret explained. "It leads to a surface opening about halfway to the mining camp." Daniel volunteered to investigate, disappearing up the narrower passage with his rifle. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Hayes and his men are in the tunnel. They breached the door somehow. I heard them about half a mile back." They resumed their journey with renewed urgency, Daniel now taking the rear position to guard against pursuit. At the narrowest point of the tunnel, Daniel and Caleb loosened supporting timbers that had begun to rot with age, creating an obstacle to delay Hayes. The final mile of tunnel passed in a blur of exhaustion. They emerged into a clearing surrounded by dilapidated wooden structures, the remnants of the once bustling mining operation. Snow had drifted against the buildings, but the area immediately around the tunnel entrance was relatively clear. "The logging road begins there," Margaret indicated a path that wound between two of the larger structures. "It follows the valley floor for about 8 miles before joining the county road." Daniel scanned their surroundings. "We should find shelter for the night. It's too late to reach the highway before dark, and Hayes won't risk the tunnel until morning." One of the smaller buildings, originally the mine foreman's office, proved to be relatively intact. Inside, Daniel started a small fire in the old iron stove, using decades-old paperwork and broken furniture as fuel. As warmth slowly filled the dusty room, Emily felt a peculiar sense of coming full circle. One abandoned structure had nearly become her grave. Another now offered shelter and the promise of escape. They departed at first light, following the logging road toward the county road visible in the valley beyond. Their progress was hampered by fallen trees and deep snow, but the promise of safety drove them forward. Noah remained remarkably calm throughout the journey, secure in his carrier against Emily's chest. They were halfway up a steep ridge when they heard the distant sound of engines, snowmobiles approaching from the direction of the mining camp. Hayes must have brought them in pieces through the tunnel, Caleb theorized grimly. Reassembled them at the camp. Daniel made a quick decision. "We need to reach the top of the ridge now. Run!" Their exhausted group scrambled up the increasingly steep slope. The engines grew louder behind them, Hayes and his men gaining ground. Rapidly on their mechanized transport, they crested the ridge just as the first snowmobile came into view below. Daniel directed them to take cover behind a cluster of large rocks that crowned the ridge's highest point. Emily positioned herself where she could see without being seen, Noah secure against her chest. From this vantage point, she could make out 2 snowmobiles weaving through the trees below. Hayes drove the lead machine, another of Jack's ranch hands behind him. The second snowmobile carried a single rider, a figure Emily recognized with a cold shock of dread. "It's Jack," she whispered. "He's with them." Daniel confirmed this through his rifle scope. "He must have joined them after we entered the tunnel." Of course, Jack would be here personally, Emily realized. This wasn't just about eliminating a liability anymore. This was about his pride, his ownership, his need to dominate completely. Caleb swore under his breath. "If Jack's here himself, he won't stop, not for anything." "Then we don't give him a choice," Daniel replied, his voice cold with resolve. He positioned his rifle carefully, taking aim at the lead snowmobile's engine compartment. The shot cracked through the clear mountain air. Below, Hayes's snowmobile swerved wildly as its engine erupted in a spray of oil and smoke. The machine veered into a snowbank and stalled, its driver thrown clear, but apparently uninjured. Jack's snowmobile accelerated, zigzagging to present a more difficult target. 2 more shots missed as the machine disappeared into a denser patch of trees. "They'll try to flank us," Daniel warned. "Caleb, watch the eastern approach. Margaret, stay with Emily and the baby." Jack's snowmobile emerged from the trees several hundred yards east of their position, climbing the ridge at an angle that would bring him up behind their shelter. Hayes and the other ranch hand were approaching on foot from a different direction. "He's going to circle behind us," Caleb warned. "Classic Parker hunting strategy. Drive the prey toward waiting guns." Margaret spoke, her voice calm amid the rising panic. "There is another way down, a game trail, very steep but hidden from view on this side." She pointed to a spot where the ridge seemed to drop away almost vertically. "It follows a cut in the rock face, difficult for men to follow, impossible for machines." Daniel assessed the proposed route quickly. "It could work, but someone needs to keep them occupied here, make them think we're all still hiding behind these rocks." "I'll do it," Caleb volunteered. "It's my brother, my responsibility. Take care of my nephew, Emily. Make sure he grows up knowing there were good Parkers too." The distant sound of Jack's snowmobile changed pitch. He was accelerating, closing, in on their position. "Go now," Daniel urged. "Margaret, lead them down. I'll join you in 5 minutes, no more." "Daniel?" Emily protested. "Please," he said, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Trust me one more time." She did, allowing Margaret to guide her toward the hidden trail, while Daniel positioned himself with Caleb among the rocks. The trail Margaret led them to was precipitous, a narrow track worn by generations of deer and elk navigating the ridge's sheer face. Gunfire erupted above them, a rapid exchange of shots that echoed across the valley. Emily pressed forward, one careful step at a time, Margaret's steady voice guiding her movement. When they finally reached the bottom, Emily scanned the sheer face above for any sign of Daniel or Caleb. The trail appeared empty, a nearly invisible scratch on the imposing rock wall. "We need to keep moving," Margaret said, her voice betraying no emotion, despite the fact that her grandson remained on the ridge. "The county road is less than a mile ahead." They set out across the open valley, floor moving as quickly as their exhaustion would allow. The county road beckoned ahead, a dark line cutting through the white landscape, representing connection to the wider world. They had covered perhaps half the distance when Margaret suddenly stopped. "Someone is coming." From the ridge, Emily turned. A dark figure was descending the nearly invisible trail, moving with remarkable speed. As the figure drew closer, features resolved into recognition. Daniel's distinctive gait, his confident movement through difficult terrain. He was alone. "Hayes is dead," Daniel reported without preamble. "Jack shot him when he realized you were escaping." "And Caleb?" Emily asked, dreading the answer. "Wounded, but alive. He managed to break cover and reach Jack's snowmobile. Last I saw, he was driving it down the other side of the ridge, Jack in pursuit on foot. He's leading him away from us," Margaret observed. Giving us time to reach the road, they covered the remaining distance to the county road with renewed determination. They had been walking less than 20 minutes when a South Dakota Highway Patrol vehicle appeared, moving cautiously on the icy road. Daniel stepped directly into its path, arms raised to ensure the officer saw them clearly. The young officer emerged, hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon. "Officer Reynolds, Highway Patrol, mind telling me what you folks are doing out here?" Daniel stepped forward. "My name is Daniel Blackhawk, Wildlife Conservation Officer for the reservation. These people need emergency protective custody and medical attention. This woman's husband tried to murder her. He's still in pursuit." "My name is Emily Parker," she said, her voice steady. "My husband, Jack Parker, left me to die in an abandoned hunting cabin during the blizzard last month. When he discovered I survived, he sent armed men to find and kill me and my son." The officer made his decision. "Get in the car, all of you. I'll radio for backup and medical assistance." As the patrol car pulled away, heading east toward Pierre, Emily looked back. One last time at the ridge they had descended. She wondered if Caleb had escaped, if Jack was still in pursuit, if the confrontation between brothers had reached its inevitable conclusion. The highway patrol car picked up speed. Daniel sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. His hand found hers, a touch that asked nothing but offered everything. "We made it," he said quietly. Emily looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully despite everything they had endured. She touched the St. Christopher medal hanging around her neck, her father's last gift, now a talisman for her son's future. "Yes," she replied, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. "We made it." In the distance, a wolf howled, its voice rising clear and pure in the winter air. Another answered from farther away, the call and response of creatures free in their element, unbound by the cruelty of men. As the sun began to set behind them, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, Emily felt something tentative and fragile taking root in her heart. Not just relief at their escape, not just gratitude for those who had risked everything to help her, but something she had thought lost forever during those dark years with Jack. Hope. A chance to begin again. A future limited only by the horizon, not by the cruel hands of a man who confused ownership with love. Noah stirred against her chest, his tiny face turning toward the sound of Daniel's quiet voice as he explained to Officer Reynolds where they had come from and what they had endured. The simple trust in her son's movement brought tears to Emily's eyes. This was what she had fought for in that abandoned hunting cabin, what had given her the strength to survive against impossible odds. Not just her own life, but the chance for her son to grow up in a world where love outweighed fear, where strength was measured in kindness rather than control. For Emily Winters, formerly Parker, that chance was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.